start out questions to the kids.
Is that number one?
Hi, I'm Paige.
Brandon.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. Brandon.
Brandon. Nice to meet you. Nick. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
Good to meet you.
Well, welcome, Brandon Munson from North Crawford School
Yes.
District. Okay. We have a series of questions for you today, but to start with, we'd like to hear a little bit about you, and then we'll go into our questions. Fair enough?
Yeah, you bet.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
So my name is Brandon Munson. I'm working on finishing up my 9th year as superintendent with the North Crawford School District. We are a rural school district about an hour south of La Crosse in southwest Wisconsin, not too far off the Mississippi River ourselves. Prior to superintendent, I was principal in the building there, did 7 years as elementary principal, and did a couple years as middle and high school principal also. So been in the district down there for quite a while and have a wide range of experiences. As many of you know, working in a small district means wearing a lot of different hats, and so I've had a lot of experience, whether that's working directly in transportation, with our food service staff, all of those different things. I'm very comfortable in all of those settings and working with those leaders in our district. Live in the district there with my wife and well, kind of our 3 kids. My oldest is actually a junior at UW La Crosse, so we see him once in a while. My middle is actually will be graduating here in a couple of months, and he will be attending Winona State University. And then we did such a bang-up job with the 2 of them that we got a bonus baby a few years after. She's a 5th grader this year. So we got our daughter after a couple of sons, and so she goes to the school that I work at. We're a very outdoorsy family. Love to spend time outdoors. My kids, it's getting better now that my sons are at an older age, but those of you that have children understand that sometimes your hobbies are the hobbies of your children, and we have adopted that. Whether it's sitting in the gym with basketball, or my oldest is on the football team at UW La Crosse, so that takes up a good chunk of our fall. But when we can, we love to be outdoors, kayaking, hiking. We don't do as much camping as we once did, but we just like to enjoy the beautiful outdoors of southwestern Wisconsin.
Okay. Okay.
All right, question number 1. How do you plan to support and enhance academic achievement across all grade levels?
Well, I think first and foremost is, we really need to ensure that we have quality tier 1 instruction happening district-wide. What that means is that we have solid, viable curriculum that our staff are using in the district, that we're aligned to state standards, and that we are teaching our students what they're expected to know and to be able to do at each grade level. That we're teaching students how to apply that knowledge outside of the classroom in a real world situation. I think that's very important. That we are meeting the needs of all of our students inside and outside of the classroom. That ranges from our students who may be on IEPs for learning or behavioral difficulties, all the way up to gifted and talented students that need that little bit of extra to continue to grow and learn. So I think it's really evaluating what systems you have in place across the district, Like I said, ensuring that, that all of your staff are using a curriculum that is aligned to standards, and that they are assessing students on those standards, and then have appropriate interventions for students when they're either not meeting those standards, or for those students that are going above and beyond that standard, how are we also meeting their needs?
The second question is, how would you address bullying and ensure a safe and inclusive school environment for everyone?
So I think this really starts with climate and culture. You know, not only within your school buildings, but really community-wide. You know, so what are the expectations that we have of kids when they come into our school buildings? How do we expect them to behave when they're here? How do we expect them to treat each other? How do we respond to that as the adults when maybe they're not meeting those expectations? What supports do we have in place for those students that may struggle meeting those expectations here in the school buildings? And then to go beyond that, and I think this is really a critical component of this, is that's a very difficult task for an educator to accomplish in the, say, 7 hours that you're face to face with children each day. It's really what is happening beyond, you know, our walls, so to speak. So, you know, what is our level of parent engagement? You know, there's a lot of research out there that the more positive and increased engagement really, you know, not eliminates, but really limits, you know, behavior in school. You know, if kids know that you have a, you know, a positive relationship with parents, or that the community is engaged in education also. And so that's a critical component, you know, to really ensure that, you know, that we have an inclusive environment. You know, it really, you know, again, look at your systems. So do we have solid PBIS systems in place in the district here? You know, we're, again, you know, we are setting expectations ahead of time and expecting the students to meet those. And then what are our supports for those students that aren't able to? You know, very much like academics, behavior is academics, and we have to teach behavior much like what we teach, you know, fourth grader fractions. We have to teach many of our kids, you know, appropriate behavior. And so, you know, what are those expectations? How are we teaching those? And what are we doing for the kids that, you know, may struggle meeting those expectations? What supports do we have in place? And then, again, how are we engaging parents in the community in that?
Thank you.
With the knowledge of budget concerns that our district is facing, tell me your experience in dealing with similar situations and how you would handle these upcoming challenges.
Yeah, well, I guess fortunately for me to be able to answer this question, unfortunately, if you're an administrator in Wisconsin right now, you know, some challenging times right now, public education in Wisconsin as far as budget goes. We know nationwide there's a lot of uncertainty at the federal level with federal dollars and all of that. You know, I really look at, you know, I'm a very kid-centered individual. You know, kids first for me. And, you know, so I think when we're looking through that budgetary lens, it's very important that we're looking at, you know, whether that's programs, whether that's people, you know, what most positively impacts our students and what is most important for us to keep in place to have a positive impact on our students. And we prioritize those things. We do that through aligning to what our mission is, what our district's vision is, what our strategic plan tells us, which hopefully was developed, you know, between the school district with community engagement and involvement in that. And those are really what we identify as our priorities. And so are our budget priorities aligning themselves with our strategic priorities in the district? And that's extremely important. Otherwise, you can get a little lost in that. And then maybe you're straying away from some of those priorities. So it's really kind of keeping that roadmap in front of us. My experience, you know, I will say we passed a referendum 2.5 years ago, an operational referendum in our district for $900,000 per year. It's a recurring referendum, meaning the money is always there. which is very difficult to pass. We passed it in our district with 62% approval rating, which was phenomenal. And I think goes to speak for the level of engagement that we have in our district, the level of transparency, our communication, with the community. Aside from that, then it really is, as I stated, it really is just what are our priorities, and are we prioritizing things that most benefit our students? And sometimes that means tough choices. Sometimes that means you may lose a staff member. An example was, shortly after I took over as superintendent, we were having some budgetary challenges in the district. At that time, we were really starting to notice an increase in student behavior. That was kind of when social emotional learning was really starting to ramp up in the district. We had one school counselor for our entire K-12 district, and she was spread thin. We were turning, that position over often. And so we made the decision through budgetary and priorities, which aligned with our strategic plan of the district of supporting all students, that we were going to eliminate it was a community position that did a lot of grant writing for us. Very important, would love to have that position in our district right now, but I needed that second counselor to be able to directly support students. And so we make those tough choices sometimes, but in the end, now we have 2 school counselors. We're supporting students' needs in the district, which is very important to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What are some ways that you plan to build trust and engagement between community members, taxpayers, and the school that allows for continued growth of the school, respect for and of the teachers and staff, and continued support for public education?
Yeah, this is a challenge, honestly, right now. I would say is one of the bigger challenges that we face in education right now is just this engagement piece, this trust piece. I think from a media standpoint, sometimes you read, educators aren't always trusted right now in the community. They have great benefit packages and their retirement packages are great and this and that. And we hear that a lot. We've been hearing that for a really long time. To me, I would say one of my biggest strengths is I'm a very transparent person. I feel I'm very approachable. I think those are kind of I would say the fundamental or foundational pieces to establishing that trust. To me, it's really kind of being out in front of the community as a district representative, to highlight all the great things that are going on in our buildings and in our classrooms, being transparent as we can. The population that we might not necessarily have to worry about as much are our parents, because they're in our buildings a lot. They see a lot of the things that are going on, whether they're here for parent-teacher conferences or music concerts or athletic event. So while we still engage those individuals, the ones that are a little bit more difficult are those either retirees or maybe transplant to the community, that don't have that natural engagement with the community. And how do we attain that? How do we get that? And that's really where you have to be intentional about that and use a variety of methods to try to reach those individuals. Whether that's a newsletter, your social media accounts, your Facebook pages, actually being out there and I don't off the top of my head know what cafe it is in the Crescent where a lot of the retirees get together for coffee in the morning. But those are good places to meet people and to really meet them on their level. And I think that's really important. So I think, transparency, approachability, and then from there, I think you really start to develop that trust in not only me, but telling the story of all the great things that are going on in the district. So people that aren't here hopefully have a good understanding of, the excellent programs, the excellent staff, and the great things that kids are learning here at La Crescent Home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So question number 5, tell us about academic success, how you define it and how you achieve it.
That's a great question.
Kind of loaded.
I think the important piece to this is understanding that all of our students are individuals. Success looks different for each and every student in our district. Some students can come into a classroom, sit down, never open a book, listen, maybe half engage with the teacher, and they get it. Like they absorb it. They just have that gift. Whereas other students, really struggle and maybe never get there. And so I think academic success is for us meeting our students where they're at, providing the supports and the services that every individual student needs. But I think the most important component of that is really showing that growth piece. So whether that's that student that can come in and just sit and they absorb everything through osmosis, or that student that has to write every single word down that the teacher says and have somebody highlight it for them and shorten it and use AI to summarize it, whatever that might look like. But how do we get each one of those students to grow within their own capacity? And that really is, I would say, our most important job as educators is how do we show student growth? How do we provide that support, to get each one of our students to grow within their capacity individually. So how do you achieve that? First and foremost, it's understanding your students. You have to know the students that are sitting in front of you. What are they capable of? What do they struggle with? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What supports do they need? How do they respond? What do they respond to positively? All of those questions go into that as instructors in the classrooms, or even our support personnel that work with our students in classrooms, is really understanding our students as individuals in the classroom. And to get that growth, we have to first, we have to achieve that understanding with all of our students. And then we have to put systems in place to reach each of those students. And I really think, more than a grade letter or, maybe a standards-based grade on a piece of paper, it's really, I think academic success is, what did that student know when they first got to me, and what does that student know when they leave my classroom at the end of the year, or at the end of elementary, whatever that might be.
Describe a time you had to make a difficult decision that impacted the entire school district. What factors did you consider? How did you communicate the decision? And what were the outcomes?
Told myself we're not going to talk about COVID. Keep that in the rear view mirror. So I won't. I'm sure I have other examples. I think I'll say a recent decision that we had to make was we had a staff member that I would say by and large was beloved on our staff by students and other staff members because of something that occurred before he came to our district, outside in another district. There were some conditions of employment that he was placed under within our school district, and we provided a lot of coaching and a lot of support for him. And basically, to make a long story short, over time he did not meet those conditions of employment, and even through some intensive coaching and support, and we had to make the difficult decision to relieve that individual of their teaching responsibilities in our district, and that's always difficult for us as administrators, as school board members, to separate the humanistic side of this out, because that's always a hard decision, regardless of what the circumstances. The person could have been 100% in the wrong. It still doesn't make it any easier as a person, knowing that you are severely impacting somebody's life and livelihood, really. So, for us, that situation, when it's an employment matter, obviously we work very closely with our attorney on that. We follow district policy, state law, all of those things very closely. And that really is the black and white. That's probably the only part of that process that's black and white, because then when it comes time to communicate with students, with staff, with parents, that's the difficult part of those decisions, and there's really no playbook for doing those things. And again, that's just a matter of being as transparent as we possibly can be within, obviously, the confines of what the law allows us to be transparent and communicative with. But that, those are decisions that really have ripple effects. And so, there's a short period of time where things are really difficult in the district after something like that happens. But those ripples, kind of like you throw a rock into the water and you see the big ripples right away, but even 40 feet away from where you threw the rock, there's still small ripples. So you feel that, and so you just continue to try to rebuild some of the cultural pieces in your district. You maintain, that communication piece. You do all that, and that really, those are cultural pieces, and if they're not addressed appropriately, as I say, those can be culture killers. So that's a most recent example, I would say.
Thank you.
Suppose test scores are flat, the budget is tight, and staff energy is low. It's your job to set a vision that inspires action and hope. How do you lead through that moment, and what kind of story do you tell to move the district forward?
I would say, so as educators, we are very, very guilty of always looking at the negative. So we can have a classroom of 22 kids, and 20 of those 22 are meeting those math standards, but we're always focused on the 2 that aren't. And that really takes up, so much of our energy. And so what I'm always preaching to our staff, we start a lot of staff meetings this way, a lot of our professional development in the district, we start this way, is tell me things that are going well. Because most of the time we know things that aren't. We know that, our reading scores aren't where they need to be. We know that some of our students are struggling with mental health issues. We know all those things. Those things are in our face every single day. And those are the things that really zap the energy of our educators, is trying to solve those problems. And so we really just need to be intentional of saying, what's going good? You get some people that are like, I don't know, I can't really think of anything. Well, did you get out of bed this morning? Yes. Hey, great. You're here. You're sitting in this chair. Okay, that's a start. Okay, so I think it's that intentionality, first and foremost, of really recognizing, probably honestly, if you looked at everything, the 95% of the things in your district that are going really well for the district. The programs that are having a positive impact on kids, the positive communications that you have with parents or with the community, programs that you're doing to engage the community, all of those things. And we can't lose sight of those things, because there is going to come a time where we do have to take those things head on. So we're going to have a test score problem at some point in time. Every district does, no matter how high achieving the district is. So when we look at our math scores from a recent assessment, and 23% of our students met that proficiency goal in math, okay, let's dig into that. Okay, so oftentimes what we find is maybe there's just 1 or 2 standards within that we missed for whatever reason. Okay, so we start with our tier 1 instruction again. Okay, what is our curriculum? Are we aligned to standards? How are we teaching those standards? How are we assessing those standards? Similarly, I won't spend a lot of time talking about the budget piece. Staff energy, that I think staff feed off of the energy, not only from each other, but from who they look to as the leaders. So whether that's the principal, obviously whether that's myself as a superintendent, if we're displaying low energy, if we're, starting meetings by saying, all right, folks, we got to dive in. Our math scores really sucked this last time. What are we going to do about this? that zaps the energy immediately, rather than say, okay, hey, let's look at our math scores. Wow, our kids scored really well in geometry. They scored really well on operations, on numerical sense, whatever those standards are, right? And then you can lead into, but you know what? Let's look at, algebraic reasoning. Okay, that was an area where our students scored well. And so I think it's really just modeling that, just, again, being very intentional of picking out, the positive things that are going on, and really celebrating those things, like over the top celebrating those things sometimes. I'll say, especially this time of the year, those that are in education know that this is a tough stretch, as you come off of, holiday break and then spring break and that stretch in there. You just have to be really meaningful and intentional about finding, recognizing, celebrating all of those positive things that are happening in your district, your building, your classroom, whatever situation it might be.
Thank you.
You discovered a long-time, well-liked staff member has been underperforming in ways that impact students. How do you handle the situation? What's your process for addressing the issue while respecting their legacy and maintaining staff morale?
When I hear this question, my mind automatically goes to coaching. I'm a teacher and coach at heart. That's, I'm not shameful to admit that I got into teaching so I could coach at the same time. Athletics was a big part of my life growing up, and so I've coached several different sports. But it's not really the sport; it's that that action of working with kids to try to reach a common goal and meeting kids where they're at and building skills and I've always said that a good teacher is a coach in the classroom. They may not be coaching how to shoot a free throw, but they're coaching how to solve a math problem, how to read expository text, whatever it might be. So when I read a question like this, I go to that automatically. That this is could potentially be a person that just maybe hasn't evolved as quickly as what it seems our students have evolved over the last 10, 15 plus years. Education has changed drastically, even as recently as the last 10 years. And so my first thought would be what can I do to coach this person? Because you don't stay in education as long as this doesn't say years, but I don't know, for some reason I go to like a 30-year veteran teacher in my head when I hear a question like this. You don't stay working with kids for 30 years if you don't love the job and if you don't want to do it. You just don't do that. There's so many opportunities for people out there now to do something different that they're not going to stay in this career if they don't love it, if they don't love kids, if they don't want to do well at it and be a good teacher. It just, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense for that. And so I think you first have to meet the person where they're at. I think you really, open and again, transparent communication. What are, trying to diagnose, what are the areas that individual is struggling with? So, maybe once upon a time you taught a lesson and that was the lesson you expected every student to get in the classroom. Well, that doesn't work anymore. We know that. We have to differentiate like crazy now in the classroom for students because they're all over the place, learning styles and learning abilities in their classroom. So does that individual just need extra support, extra coaching, extra professional development in some of those areas? But you have to diagnose what those areas are first. And I think that really happens just by having, transparent conversations. I would say hopefully before any of that happens though, that there's been a relationship built. And for me, I take relationship building, probably one of the most important parts of this job is that, because I know there's going to be a point in time, whether it's myself, whether it's the administrative team, any other department leadership in the district, where they're going to have a difficult conversation or they're going to run into a difficult situation with a staff member And if you have not taken the time to build that relationship, it makes those situations exponentially more difficult. And so in my case, you know, if this came directly to me as the superintendent, I would hope that I had taken the time to develop a relationship with the staff, with this specific person, that we can have that open and transparent conversation. Again, to diagnose and then to figure out what are the best supports to put in place for that person, whether that's a mentor within the building, outside of the district, professional development, some additional training. And then I would say to wrap that up would be, you know, just giving that person time to grow. Much like our students in the classroom, they all learn at different rates and different levels. Adults are no different. So we would need to make sure that once we feel we have adequate supports in place for this individual, we give that person time. And along the way, we're continuing to do that coaching. We are continuing to monitor that individual, you know, adjusting and changing things as needed. And hopefully we arrive at a common end goal. So, you know, so we really don't have to have those, you know, that difficult conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell us about a time you improved the special education services and programming, and how did you do that?
I'll give you a really simple answer is the only, well, I won't say, I'll give myself a little more credit than that, but my involvement was just hiring good people and giving them the tools, the resources, and the support to do their job appropriately and effectively in the district. I have always said from the beginning, my background is not in special education. I was a regular education teacher at the middle school level for several years. When I became a principal, a lot of it I learned by fire, I'll be quite honest with you. But I never did it alone. I always made sure that, you know, I was either reaching out to peers, working with people within our district. We have experts in these areas in our district. Every single district, some of them are probably in this room right now, that are experts in special education, appropriate services, appropriate programming. You know, for me, I would say generally, overall speaking, it's finding good people, you know, recruiting those people, getting them into your district, retaining those people, most importantly, providing them the support and the services and you know, that they need to work successfully with students. I guess I would say on a more specific, a time that we improved special education services, I would say this actually was something that we did when I was still a principal, before I became a superintendent, was we were starting to see an increase in students that were coming to us on the autism spectrum. Some very high functioning, others very low functioning. We had it. We're a school district of 400 students and about 80 total staff in our district. We did not have the capacity at the time to meet those needs, which were very different for us. We weren't, you know, we were handling EBD kids, we were handling learning disabilities. The autism thing was newer to us at the time, and it seemed to be increasing each year. We actually hired a staff member, sent her to get specialized training in dealing with autism, and she actually started I'll say a separate autism program within our district. And that was great because she was able to meet those students' needs where they were at. And then I would say above and beyond that, because, you know, we're not we practice inclusion in our district. We believe strongly in inclusion in our district. We also provided our regular ed teachers with that professional development. This teacher did a lot of training with our regular education teachers. We were very purposeful in what we did to meet those students' needs because we knew we were failing prior to that. We just weren't. Again, we didn't have the capacity. We just didn't have the people that were able to do it effectively. And so, you know, we made some changes. You know, we provided people with the support, the training that they needed. This person was passionate about it. And we supported the heck out of her, even on the really, really difficult days, which there are. We supported the heck out of her, and then we provided that same training to our regular education teachers, because these are all of our students, not just her students. So I would say that's a specific example of how we work with a specific special education population in our district.
Wonderful, thanks. La Crescent Hoka has made significant investments in its facilities in recent years, but resources are always limited. How do you evaluate facility needs, both urgent and long-term, while balancing a restricted budget? Can you walk us through your decision-making process and how you prioritize projects?
So there, yeah, I think there's a few layers to this. I would start. I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways, because I think there's different scenarios here. So I think the urgent piece, those are always the difficult ones. We can budget all we want for things. We can have long-term capital plans in place, which we should have all of those things. But we're still going to have something unexpected go wrong throughout the course of the year. That's just the nature of running a school district with 2 large buildings and several facilities and all of that. And so I think it's evaluating, are we in a financial place where we have a contingency fund, whether that's our fund balance. In Wisconsin, I guess I don't know this level of detail of finance in Minnesota schools, but in Wisconsin schools, we have a Fund 46, which is a capital improvement fund, which we're very intentional in our district to budget dollars to go into our Fund 46 every year. So when we do have something go wrong with our HVAC, we're not pulling out of our fund balance, we're dipping into our Fund 46, which we've been very intentional about. So what accounts or what programs do we have in place to address what I would say some of those urgent or some of those spontaneous needs that come up throughout the school year? As far as the long-term piece, that really, I'm very big into processes as a superintendent. When I took over, we did not have a long-term capital improvement plan in our district. That was one of the first tasks that I undertook in the district, was working with our facilities director, our school boards, facilities committee, and really developing that 10-year capital improvement plan. And that really is our roadmap. We used that as recently as 2.5 years ago, when we did a $4.5 million capital referendum to update our facilities. We relied on that plan to say, these are the things that we have prioritized. And so this is what's important. We know we've got to put a new roof on. The roof is 28 years old in the building. We have to prioritize. And all of that was done through our capital improvement plan. We revisit that plan at least on an annual basis. We review that with our committee, with our facilities people, myself. We reprioritize certain projects because some things, go bad sooner than other things. Our board, all of our board members get their eyeballs on that and give their input on it. We engage community. We did that as recently again when we did our referendum. We had community input sessions prior to the referendum to say, what are the facility needs you see? Because it's easy for me as somebody who's in our buildings every day to see certain things, but people off the street may see it differently. And so I think, there's a couple of different approaches to this. One of those is, what processes do we have in place to address? I would like to say we should never be surprised that we need to replace windows in the building. We should have known that 10 years ago that, hey, this is going to come up in about 10 years. We need to address this, this, and this. What are we doing about that? Are we putting money aside every year? Are we budgeting for those things? Do we have other accounts set up in the district to address those issues? What does that look like? And then hopefully we do, because we also know throughout the course of the school year, we're going to have things happen. And we need to be able to ideally address those things financially without taking resources away from kids and staff. That's always, to me, that's always the worst case scenario is I'm sorry, we can't fund this program this year because we need $50,000 to do this instead. I guess that's kind of how I work through those. It's certainly a collaborative effort, absolutely.
Thank you. Question 11. Please share your thoughts on how districts should hold themselves accountable for academic progress, improvement, and what steps should be taken when benchmarks are not met. If you can share an example.
Well, one thing we tell our staff is, generally speaking, data does not lie. We have to be a data-driven school district. We have to allow data to inform our instruction on a daily basis, whether that's down to the individual student level or whether that's district-wide. We need to be transparent about that. We need to all hold each other accountable for that. And so, if the principal has a conversation with the ELA teacher because our reading scores aren't up to the standard that we set for them to be at, the principal likewise needs to hold themselves accountable to say, do you have the resources that you need from me? Do you have the support that you need from me for you to be successful, for you to provide those opportunities for students to be successful? Again, that comes with examining your tier 1 instruction. What's the curriculum you're teaching? Is it aligned to standards? How are we assessing that? What are we doing about that? What are we doing for students that learn the standards? What are we doing for students that don't learn those standards? Accountability really is district-wide. So likewise from my seat as the superintendent of the district, it's making sure that our leaders in the building have the resources that they also need, and to prioritize those resources for them. I think it's communicating those things and being transparent with that data with our community and really engaging the community in that. In our district, we fluctuate. We seem to struggle a lot with our reading scores in our district. They're getting better. We adopted some curriculum a couple of years ago. We've done a lot of coaching and professional development. Point being is all of our staff got to a point where it wasn't acceptable to them anymore. And I think that's a big step for some people, to accept that, yeah, this is what the data is showing, and I'm not proud of it, but I know that it needs to be better, and I'm going to hold myself accountable for that. And so they do that by communicating to their administrator that, hey, we need to look at our curriculum. And that's exactly what we did in our district. My elementary principal came to me and said, we look at ed reports, and what we're working with right now in our elementary isn't cutting it. Our kids are not learning the standards that they need. This curriculum just isn't addressing it. And so, we put processes in place to improve that. So I think, you look at your tier 1, and then what other systems do you have in place? We haven't talked much yet tonight about our tier 2 and our tier 3, so our multi-level systems of support in the district. So we know ideally that our tier 1 instruction should meet 80% of the needs in our classrooms and in our buildings. That's not always our reality. Sometimes it's 40%. So what are we doing with those students? How are we supporting those students, whether that's through tier 2 instruction, or for some of our lowest students to try to close those gaps, the tier 3 instruction. And so I think it's really, again, knowing where each of your students are at, and what do each of those individual students need for them to display and show growth in your district. And then it's sharing that out, and it's providing, again, the training, the professional development, the support that our staff members need to be able to do that job. Because as I say, we oftentimes at the district level, I got this from my predecessor, so excuse me, it's a little bit corny, but we oftentimes get caught up in the beans, buses, and basketballs of school districts. And we forget that our true job in a school district is to teach and to get to, to enable kids to learn. And so, again, that always needs to be our priority, even if that means pushing other initiatives, other programs, other priorities aside to make sure that, our students are learning and growing academically.
Thank you.
Final question. What is the superintendent's role in the broader community?
Well, it's obvious, the research I've done on the district here is, the school really, really is the community. I guess simply stating that it really is the hub, as it is in many of our school districts. That's the value of, I would say a smaller school district is, the school really becomes the center of the community. It's where, people come to engage and to see what's going on and to support students and to support staff. And so I think, my role in that really is just facilitation. I would look at that as, and just really being that leader that says, are we doing enough to make sure that we're engaging the community? So how are we getting people into our building? And how are we getting people out into the community? So are there programs that we're doing, and how is that communicated and what does that transparency look like? And we know, once upon a time that involved newspapers. That was a really big method of how people knew what was going on in the school because they read it in the newspaper that week. Well, we know now we need to have a variety of different methods that we are engaging the community. Again, I listed them earlier, social media, newsletters, whether that's in mailboxes or electronically. Newspaper still has a role. There are still people that, are very committed to the newspaper, and that's where they rely on, to get their information. But I think it's really understanding, the broader community consists of everybody in our communities, not just parents of students, not just our staff. It really is, like I said, those grandparents whose kids are long gone out of the district now, but they've stayed here and they still live in our community. People that have, transplanted to, the La Crescent community for whatever reason it might be. How are we keeping those people engaged? My job is really to facilitate that, from a district level, to really encourage our people to be constantly looking at how we are better engaging our community.
Excellent. Thank you.
That was our final question.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I have a couple. I guess. I'm just gonna look at my notes here. So I guess one question I would ask, and what have you done enrollment studies in the district? What have you done projections on student enrollment? We know nationwide enrollment is going down. Certainly in Wisconsin, statewide enrollment is dropping. But specific to La Crescent Hoka, have you done some studies or projections on student enrollment, up or down, neutral? And I guess maybe some responses to that as far as has that changed how your strategic planning in the district goes, or your budgeting, or planning for programs. So I know there's a lot to unwrap in that question. I apologize. So I don't know if somebody feels comfortable.
We did one in 2017 when we were working on a referendum, and it was projected to go down, a slight decline. It plateaued, but in recent years it has gone down. We're hoping for a little bit of a COVID bump.
We have some rural competition too, just because we have kind of bubble communities where they can kind of choose to go one way or another. But we also compete with the local online academy that also offers online schooling.
But we're a positive inflow for open
Right.
enrollment.
Yes.
Thanks, that was my follow-up question
Yes.
to that.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good sign.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be another study done soon, it sounds like. But it's a little difficult because the babies are born across the state line. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit more difficult to do the
To get
long-term
the data.
projection. Right.
Thank you. Kind of a two-part, well, I'll ask the first part of this question. And I guess I don't know if the administrative team is allowed to, to weigh in also on this, but I would say, what are, we'll say 1 to 2 programs that are going on in the district that you think are working really well and that you would like to see continue and maybe build upon going forward?
We have an amazing preschool program. We normally retain most of the children that attend that, and it's very well received in the community.
And it was brought to our attention just over this, when the school year kind of started, our elementary PBIS program has been kind of recognized statewide. So I know that that's pretty important for our little community to recognize that. And we know that the early learning is what really is their base. So it's nice that we have a good program with that and good staff that are creating that and implementing that and carrying that on.
I would say then likewise, 1 to 2 programs that maybe you all see just need a little tinkering or fine tuning or something that has potential but just maybe needs some additional leadership or guidance. And I know that may be hard to answer with an audience here because I know we certainly don't want to step on toes. And I'm not asking you to do that. I guess just trying to get a sense of, some things going on in the district.
Personally, I feel our nutritional program needs some work.
Okay.
I can't really think of anything. I can tell you that we've made a lot of strides with programs that were kind of ailing over the last few years, and a lot of that was COVID derivative. But football, our athletics, and we've got a great robotics program. Our tech ed is working hard on our innovative program with trades. We've got quite a few kids that aren't necessarily college bound. So it's nice to see that highlighted, especially in this day and age when it's hard to pay for college. So I think that's something to always.
I guess if I have time, one final question. What would be the board's expectations of the superintendent, I'll say, I guess for lack of a better word, outside of the contracted day? Some districts are like, superintendent, you need to be at everything. So I need you at that music concert, I need you at every athletic event, I need you at the music on Saturday nights, whatever it might be. I guess, is there an expectation, from the board specific to that? That piece is important to me, but it's also important if I were to come into the position that there's a lot of transparency, between us, so I make sure that I'm, meeting the expectations of the board with that.
It's hard to measure. I do like when people say, damn, that guy's everywhere. Where the heck is he? So there's that middle ground of, I love it when people say he seems to be all out. And that's what I like to hear. When I hear the other side, like, I don't see the person. How come they're not? So where's that middle ground in there? You have to have a life as well, but we want you to be out there to be a face of what we're putting forward as well.
Somewhere
And if-
between a loyalty pledge and feeling like a latchkey kid.
That made sense to me, Mr. Markin.
Brandon, this is Eric. I think it's important too, like if that ever became an issue, we would want to just come and knock on your door and say why and how we can help you and support you. And do you feel comfortable here? Is your family comfortable here? So I think that for me, I would want you and your family to be like, oh my God, I love La Crescent. We have an awesome community. Look at the school, look at the staff. I'm proud to be here. That is my only expectation as an individual, but hopefully as a board, we see that as well.
I mean, your daughter's basketball games will probably be done by 7:30. Then JV will start, and then the varsity. I mean, you'll be home by 9:30. Quarter to 10.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You're getting
Depending
older,
on
that's
cross-town
that's
traffic.
getting close to my bedtime.
We only have one
Once upon a
spot
time, that was easy to do, but that's,
Okay.
yeah, as I get a little older, that gets a little more challenging. Yeah, no, I get it, and I'm not asking that because I don't feel like that's a concern. You know, as I said, I'm a leader in a rural district right now, and whether I want to be in the community and engaged, I don't really have choice in the matter. You know, I go to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk, and you're engaging at that time, whether you want to be or not. You know, that comes with the territory of you know, being a district leader. So, great. That's all the questions I have.
Thank
Okay.
you. for
Thank you.
attending.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Paige, did you want to ask that awkward Packer
Oh.
question or not?
Please do.
I'm pretty sure we know
I
the
don't.
answer.
My voice is gone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we know the answer anyway. So we don't,
You came
He's a
from
Packer
Wisconsin.
fan. He's got.
I know.
So this is our deciding.
You just tell Paige, tell me what you need me to say.
Just say Carolina Panthers.
Oh, I don't know. They're really hard to cheer for.
yeah. That is.
I like the
That's the
quarterback.
right answer.
That's-
You know, funny thing is, when her voice clears up, she loses the accent. It's weird.
Packer fan, but what I would tell you is I'm very convincing. My wife is from the Twin Cities originally, and I have converted her to be a Packer fan. She
Ooh,
grew up.
nicely
She
done.
grew up a lifelong Vikings fan, and she.
We would have to interview her as well. So,
I can maybe arrange that.
You got a
All right,
good
thank you.
negotiator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion to recess for 15. I'll second.
motion to recess for 15. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Homework. He's like my son.